Hi everybody, Steve Farmer coming to you from Tucson at the Broadmoor Penthouse. Yes, it was nice visiting the Camus Towers, but in the end the maid ratted me out and I had to come back home. Here we have our feature game from round 2, and surprisingly it's from the booster section. Now there were a couple good games from the open section, the championship section, but I thought this would be an interesting game to bring for two reasons. There's a lot to learn from it, and it was an interesting game. So let's get on with it. Oh, first of all, we have Phil Kirby, who's rated 968 playing white, and he's playing Austin Reed, who is 1154 playing black. We start out with a manly opening of e4, but it gets real effeminate after e6. d4, d5, knight c3, bishop b4, e5, c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. Okay, this is an offshoot line, but it's been played a few times. Queen to b6, and now I think queen to d3 is an interesting idea. It's never been played before as far as I know, but let's take a look at it. And then if c4, then we trade, and now queen to e2. And we have a level position here. However, black is stuck with his typical problem of a bishop on c8. So I think in the long run it's okay for white, but okay. In the game, white castled. And now the most typical move here is knight g to e7, and then there's a couple paths to go by with either bishop to e3, takes, and cd4, bishop d7 with a roughly level game. Or with dc5 right away, takes, queen to here, a6, bishop d3, queen c7, bishop d2, and again we have a roughly level game. However, black chose to take on c3. Now, there's nothing really majorly wrong with this move other than it removes the tension a little too quickly. I think that if all other things are equal, you want to maintain the tension on the position so that you might be able to make a favorable exchange later on. But he played bishop takes c3 here. Bishop takes c6, sort of forced. And then we get these trades cd4, and knight e7. I think white's maybe just a tiny bit better. And then bishop a3 is a good move. And now I think that black should continue with bishop a6. What he played was knight to f5. And we can see by this little arrow and red square that the black king is stuck in the center after this. So, let's take a step back. It might be worth it for black to continue on with normal development moves like bishop a6, rook to e1, and now queen to d8. Seems like it's moving backwards, but this allows black the opportunity to castle kingside, get his king to safety, and there's not a lot of worries about attack over there. The knight's still lingering around in case it's needed on the king side, so I think black's doing okay after this. I think that white might be a tiny bit better, but come on, it's not a big difference. However, in the game after knight to f5, things are starting to get a little precarious for black already. Rook to b1 was played, now queen to a6, rook to b3 protecting the bishop, and again, black's still stuck in the center. And now queen to c4. Now, when I'm wandering the tournament hall looking in on games, I look at the booster section too. And I remember seeing this position. And I was wondering how badly black is going to get beaten up here. It's a French defense after all. All kidding aside, white does have a very powerful move in this position. In this position he played c3, which is not the best move. It still maintains an edge for white, no doubt about it, but there's a much better move here. If you'd like to pause the video and see if you can find what white should have played, go ahead. Don't worry about it too much. It's a simple developing move, but we'll get into that in more detail. So if you'd like to do that, go ahead and pause the video, or you can listen to me talk about the Chess Triad while you're contemplating the move. The Chess Triad. Yes, I want to explain this. In chess, there are three very, very important factors, at least for when you're starting out. The Chess Triad: material, space, time. MST. Just remember that. This is a very handy tool to use when you get into a position and you're not quite sure which path you should go down. Should I do something that takes advantage of my material advantage? Should I do something that takes advantage of my time advantage? Or should I do something that takes advantage of my space advantage? On all three items, material, space, and time, there's a plus and a minus to them. So you need to know what to do if you have a material advantage, and you need to know what to do if you have a material disadvantage. With time, you need to know what to do when you have a lead in development, or conversely, if you are lagging in development, what do you do? In space, same way. What do you do if you have more space? What do you do if you have less space? So let's dig into these one by one. The first thing that we'll look at is material. This is really the simplest of them all. Material, if you have an advantage in material, you want to trade pieces. So say you have a pawn advantage. You want to trade pieces to get into a winning ending. Say you're a piece up. You want to trade everything off so you get a really easy ending. If you are down in material, this is the negative side to it. You need to know what to do there. Well, if you're down in material, you want to complicate the hell out of things. You're losing already. If you're down in material and it's by a losing amount, then you want to complicate. You may even want to sacrifice even more material. Because if you can complicate things, you may get lucky and your opponent may go astray in the complications. So if you're down in material, complicate things as deeply and quickly as you can. Okay, the next item on the chess triad is space. Always think of it in this order: material, space, and time. MST. So space, the plus side of it, if you have a spatial advantage, you want to gain more space. More space means you have more room for your pieces to operate in, and your opponent has less space to operate in. So if we look at the dark side of this, if you have less space, it makes sense to trade pieces. If you trade pieces in a cramped position, you're giving your remaining pieces more room to operate. I think that that's pretty much common sense, and I think most people will understand that. Now, the most vague of all three things of the chess triad is time. Time is elusive. If you don't take advantage of a development advantage quickly, you may lose it. I have a friend, Jim Cade, who says that whenever he's offered a pawn, he'll take it, because in 5 or 6 more moves, he'll still have the pawn, but the advantage that the opponent had by offering the pawn, i.e. the gain in time, may have dissipated. So he always looks at an offered pawn very carefully. So if you have the advantage in time, you must attack. You must do something aggressive. Either attack the enemy king or attack a portion of the board where you can secure some sort of tangible advantage, such as you can pile up on a pawn on the queen's side, or your attack could lead to a mating attack against the enemy king. But no matter the case, you want to take advantage of your time as quickly as possible, because it's not going to be there forever. In the end of this, if you do follow a line that wins material, you also have to remember that when you win material, you need to consolidate your position. So that takes some of your time advantage away from doing that too. But you've traded it off for a material advantage. Alright, now the flip side is if you have a disadvantage in time, you must develop effectively. There's no time to waste around with this. You must put your pieces on the best squares as soon as possible. You know, if you have to make like a long circuitous route with a knight or something, you might want to put that off for a moment and worry about developing something else more effectively. So that's the chess triad: material, space, and time. Now, does one weigh heavier than the other? No, they all have equal weight. They all have 1/3 of an importance of the position. By using the chess triad, you actually have 6 things to think about: the plus and minus side of each of the 3 items: material, space, and time. Okay, so now if we go back to this position here, it's white to move, And I'll give you the hint. The key factor in this one is time. White has an edge in space. His pawns are further up the board. He's got good control of the b file. But the leading indicator here, to me, that says time is of the most importance, is the stranded black king in the center. If you can get to him quick enough, it's game over. If you can keep him from castling, that gives you very good chances of getting to the king. So let's look at what should have been played. And that move, I hope you paused the video and found the move queen to d2. Quite simply, white is winning after this. He wants to double the rooks on the b file. He's got the king trapped in the center, and then maybe bring the queen to either a5 or to g5, whatever the position calls for. And black is just trapped. And his rook on h8, as we'll see in a lot of these lines, never really gets into play. Now, if he plays h5, which might be one of the best ways to combat the lines that we're going to look at, I think queen to a5 here is the move, and we're simply threatening to play rook to c3, forcing the queen to move, and then we can take on c6 at some point, and we're up a pawn. So king d7 to protect that pawn. Now knight to g7 is just applying more pressure all over the board. So we can see that white has a very, very clear advantage in this position. The king is definitely not going to get out of the center, and I think that white is just winning here. So if he tries a more normal looking developing move like bishop to a6 here, okay, well, he's threatening mate, so we got to move the rook, but that was already part of our plan. Now rook to c8 is probably the best defensive resource. Now white has a choice here. He can play queen to a5, which is a good move and leads to a winning position for white, but I like the more forcing moves. I like the move g4 here. Okay, now this forces the move knight to e7. In truth, taking on d4 and just giving up the material might be best. That's how desperate black's position is here. But you wouldn't know it to look at it from this position. So, knight to e7. So this position actually brings up an interesting conundrum about the chess triad. What do you do in a position? Which one gets more weight, material, space, or time? Well, if you can win a queen, then material. Let's take the obvious out of the picture for right now. Let's say we're looking at a position like this where all three possibilities seem viable. You know, white could try and gain more space with something like bishop to c5 and a4, that kind of thing. Or move the knight and play f4 and f5, gaining more space. Material, there's not really a clear-cut way to win material right now. So we can kind of leave that out. Queen to g5 might do something along that line, but we're dropping a pawn on c2 for the one on g7, and I'm not sure. And that just gets kind of gray. We don't need to go into gray things. And material, if you're heading material, they say you want to trade. Well, no one's ahead in material here. If you're heading space, you want to gain more space, and you want to avoid trades. And then time, well, time is actually the overwhelming feature in this position. It may not seem like it, and that's why I wanted to present this game. All other indicators are saying don't trade this healthy bishop on a3 here. Don't trade it for this somewhat passive knight on e7. Yet, if we follow through the chess triad and we do some calculations, we're going to find that that is actually exactly what white should do. He should play bishop takes e7 here. It's a brilliant move, actually. But we need to have calculated some other things to determine that. So let's step back, and if you'd like to pause the video and study this, try and determine why bishop takes e7 is the best move. It seems counterintuitive at first, but when you do some calculations, you're going to find that it's winning. Okay, hopefully you have paused the video and you found the reason that if black takes now, which he kind of has to, then what do you play? Well, if you contemplated why we take on e7, surely it's going to lead you to rook to b7. Now, if he plays king to e8, we go queen to g5, and we're going to see a situation similar to this in our main line. And this brings up another little point I want to mention, is that when you're calculating, let's go back here, when you're calculating and you see that king to e8 and queen to g5 is very similar to the line that we're going to see after the rook is taken, we don't need to fully calculate everything out in the king to e8 line. We can just go, oh, well, we have the same position there, but I'm not down the exchange. So then we can move on with the main line with bishop takes b7. So what was the trade on e7 all about, Alfie? Well, after rook takes b7, it's checked. The king is forced back to the back rank, and he has several bad choices to choose from. First of all, if he goes to f8, hoping to get in g6 and king to g7 and rook to f8 to try and hold things, we don't give him time. Queen to f4. And it's surprising how a mate threat will force your opponent's hand. So he has to push. Now we take. And black cannot allow white to take on g7 because he'll just get mated in a couple moves. So g6. But his position is like Swiss cheese. It's full of holes. Queen to d6 check. And now if king to e8, we got f7 is checkmate. So king to g8. And now rook to g7 is mate. Shows you the importance of time, doesn't it? So king f8 looked pretty fugly. What about king to d8? Well, this doesn't help because we check. And if he moves the king, queen to e7 is mate, so he has to block. And now there's no stopping the mate. And lastly, if king to e8, we have queen to g5, we're threatening mate. And he can try and hold on a bit longer with rook to c7. The idea here is to give back some material to get the queen to b4 to help defend. But after this, it's really a cakewalk for white. That poor rook never got a chance to get into the game. White is up a rook and a knight. Yeah, not much fun for black. And here, if f6, well, queen takes g7 with mate coming soon. Oops. So now we can go all the way back to here, and we can see a very concrete reason why bishop takes e7 is the move to play here. But let's go back a little further here to this position, and it's hard to believe that a simple developing move like queen to d2 gives white a completely winning position. It's very interesting that if you stay alert to the opportunities that present themselves, you're going to realize that you have a lot more in your position than you think. And one of the key factors here that I did not mention earlier, but has a lot of bearing here, is attacking with bishops of opposite color. Now this is pretty much a theme, a modus operandi, if you will, of play from the amateur in the first couple rounds at least. I have presented some fragments already that have shown the bishops of opposite color and the importance that it plays for the attacker. In this case here, the dark squares are really weak, and this bishop on a3 is just keeping black from running away to safety. So it's a very key factor in the position. And when you start looking at other factors like how can you possibly infiltrate on the light squares as well, then we start to see this possibility of rook fb1 and then rook to b7, starting to try and dominate both color complexes and keeping the king pinned back on the back rank. So it all starts to come together when you start to piece together the moves. Yeah, the king is forced back, and then queen to g5 is going to spell the end. It was unfortunate that Phil didn't see this, but give him a chance to improve. He's rated 968. Well, let's get back to our game where Phil played c3. And from here on out, we have a roller coaster of evaluations on this position. It goes good for white, equal, good for white, equal, good for white, equal. Bishop to a6. Now, queen to d2 here would be very bad because queen takes f1 would be mate. So rook to e1, knight to e7. And now here, Phil zigs when he should have zagged. Then he plays queen to d2. Okay, let's jump back, if we will, to where we played queen to d2 in that variation, and let's look at the difference in the two positions here. This is from my suggested move. knight's on f5, bishop's on c8, and white's pawn is on c2. Those are the main differences. But here, black is totally lost, and here, white is just a tiny, tiny bit better. Amazing the difference that it makes by having an extra move in there. So, let's look at what should have been played. I felt that here, well, actually, if you want to pause the video, what would you play if you were playing white in this position? There's still a chance to get a very good advantage for white here. Alright, I hope you found knight to d2. And the point here is he has to play queen to d3. If he plays queen to a4, then we got rook to b8 check, takes, and we get the queen. So that's out of the question. So queen to d3 is the only move. And now bishop takes e7. Surprise, surprise. We're doing this to stop black from ever castling. And now queen to c1. And we're threatening to infiltrate. Now the queen on d3 is protecting the bishop on a6. But white can throw in rook to e3. The queen has to leave that diagonal, and then queen to a3 check would win the bishop. So he's got to exercise caution here. It's best to either move the bishop or the king out of the forking lines coming up. So let's look at bishop c8. And we can check, king to e8, and rook eb1. But isn't this dropping the piece on d2? Okay. We're back to the chess triad once again. Material, space, or time, what is more important? Well, here, the black king is still stranded in the center, so I think the time is more important. So queen takes d2. Now we go queen to c5. Now the key feature in this is the weak dark squares around the black king and the fact the king cannot castle. So he should try and find a way for his king to get out with f5. But what if he tries bishop d7? Then we can check, and he has to give up the bishop, but that's not the worst of it. He gets mated. So here he should play f5 or f6, but after pawn takes, queen takes c6, king f7, queen takes a8. White is up the exchange and a pawn. Even though he had to give up his knight on d2, he comes out ahead in the long run. So after queen to c1 here, instead of moving the bishop, what about king to e8 instead? Well, now we have rook to e3. The queen has to run away. The black king is already moved, so he cannot castle. And for him to bring his h-rook in the game, he's going to have to come back onto the 7th rank. So white's got an advantage in time in that regards, because white is fully developed, and he has a space advantage. So out of those two factors, we come to realize that the move c4, aiming to gain more space and break up the pawn structure of black, is the way to go here. But it's a little more potent than that. There's a threat here. Say black does a know-nothing move like, let's try h6. Then pawn takes, queen checks. Well, he can avoid losing the rook with king to e7. Now queen to d6, king to e8, and now rook to b8. King e7. Now, it'd be very easy to grab the rook on h8, but you want to close things out with proper form, and queen to c7 does that. And after king to e8, rook to b3, and he can't stop mate. He can only give up some material to delay it. It cannot be stopped. That's what happens if you don't pay attention to what white is trying to accomplish. So I think the best here for black is to try and get some counterplay. To complicate things, if you will. He's already in a dire situation, and complications seems like the only way to go here. So c5, but after queen a3, we're hitting the pawn and the bishop. And after bishop c8, queen takes c5, we maintain the pressure on black, and he still cannot castle. Now, if he tries bishop to here, look at this pressure we're just mounting here. Winning a pawn, so white's 2 pawns up. And check this out. I mean, the pressure just keeps mounting and mounting. So let's move queen g4, protects the bishop. But now, black is all tied up. If the king moves away, he drops the bishop. If the queen moves off that diagonal, he drops the bishop. So now we can reposition our knight to come into the fun and games and add to the pressure. It's all over for black here. But we'll just play on a sample line here of the ills that await him. After g6, queen to c5, queen to e7. Now, is it possible to play queen takes d5 and just trade everything off into a winning endgame, 3 pawns up? But queen to b5 is, again, proper form. Queen e6. Now we can take, now we check, king up, and we pick up the rook. White's up a knight and 2 pawns, and I get the feeling that black's going to get mated within a half dozen moves or so. Let's go back to our game. So knight to d2 was a move that needed to be played here. Queen to d2. White's a bit better still. He hasn't thrown anything away, but he hasn't closed the game out in proper form. Queen to d3. Okay, here's one place that I would like you to pause the video and see if you can find what white should play here. White to move and win. Okay, this video is full of quizzes like this, and we're coming back again to our point of the weak dark squares and how do we control both color complexes and get everything we want. In the game, queen to g5 was played, and white's still a tiny bit better, but much better was rook to b7. First thing to note is if he takes the rook, he loses his queen. If he plays queen takes d2, we get this in-between check, grabbing the knight, king moves, knight takes d2, and through this little combination of moves, white's a piece up. So the best move in this position seems to be knight to g6, and now queen to b2. We don't have to worry about that rook right now, because if he plays bishop takes b7, queen takes b7, we're hitting the rook. He has to move it here. It's the only square where it's not open to capture. Now knight to g5, we're threatening mate. Queen to f5, and now rook to b1. If we take a step back, that chess triad can be a real bugger, because we always put a lot of importance on material. And white gave up the exchange already, and this move rook to b1 is giving up the knight on g5. But time is of the essence. Time does not last. Time is fleeting. It will not be with you in a couple more moves. So when you have situations that involve time as one of the key factors, it requires calculation. So let's take a look at this. Rook to b1. Of course, he's going to take the knight, adds defense to the rook on d8, and doubles the protection on e7. But queen to c6. And we can see the terrible nature of the exposed black king with this line. Rook to d7, rook to b8 check. The only move here is queen to d8. Now we can take the queen, king takes. And the unfortunate thing for black is that even though he's getting nominally equal material here right now, after queen to a8, king to c7, and the rook on h8 is protected, otherwise we would just simply grab that and win. But here we have a queen, a bishop, and a pawn versus 2 rooks and a knight, which nominally speaking is equal in material, but black is just totally lost here. The queen goes romping around picking off pawns. And I'll just give you a sample line on this real quick, because all these checks are going to lead to the key position that we want. No matter how you go about it, this is eventually going to happen. Alright, now he has to protect the rook, and now this comes in, we're threatening mate. So sooner or later this position would arise on the board. There's nothing he could do to stop it, or he'd lose the rook on d7. So rook c7, ready to give up the rook and go on fighting, and it's probably possible for white to just take it, but we check here first, and if rook to b7, queen to a8 check, king comes here and we can take the rook free and clear. Actually, that'll lead to mate too. So king to d7 has to be tried. Now we can take, and after he takes, queen to a7, king to c6. If he goes back to the back rank, it just makes it a little easier for white. So, and we can take here. You can bring the rook out, but we get another pawn with check. King to c7, queen to d6. And the problem for black is he's going to give up another pawn with check. And now g3, just making left for the king, and the spike check. Knight e7, check. Yeah, he's threatened with mate now, so he's got to deal with that. And now a4, and this pawn's just going to romp up the board. Hey, white has 5 extra pawns. I think he's going to win this. Let's get back to our key position here after queen to b2. So we just looked at bishop takes rook. What about rook to c8, just bolstering that c pawn, trying to avoid any of that crap happening? Well, simply rook takes a7. And you won a pawn, and the black king is still stuck in the middle of the board. To get his king to safety, he's going to have to try something real convoluted, like c5. And we can take that. We're 2 pawns up now. Queen to b5. By trading the queens, he eases the pressure, but after this, threatening that pawn, bishop to d7, take, and we got a 3rd pawn. Yeah, white's easily winning in these lines. Alright, let's get back to our game, where Phil, fairly new to the game, I'm sure, missed that move, but played queen to g5. I'd say white's still pretty much better in this position, but he had wins. But from here on out, it starts to really fluctuate in the evaluation of the position. Now h6 is a good move by black, and I think that white's only a tiny bit better after this. Here he plays queen to g3, which allows the trade and leads to a dead equal game. Queen to g4 is a better idea, and the thing is, when you're attacking, you want to keep your queens on the board. It gives the advantage to the attacker. Say after queen to d2, rook eb1, queen f4. Now he's forced to trade the queens, otherwise the knight on h4 is going to fall. So yeah, this is just a little bit better for white, not much at all. But it was a better try to keep the queens on the board with queen g4. Queen g3, queen takes, and now he plays f takes g3. Not proper form. It's always best to take toward the center. In this case, h pawn takes on g3. Why? Well, in the future you may want to play f4 to f5 if it's needed. It will be there. But when you take with the f pawn, you don't have anything like that. Yeah, you might get some pressure down the f file, but that's not a very likely proposition. Bishop c4 was played, and now rook to b2. And now black could have played knight takes h4 and maintained an equal game, but he played king to d7. Knight takes g6. Missing. Rook to b7 check. King c8. Rook takes. Knight takes h4. H takes. g5. Pawn takes. Pawn takes. Rook to e7. This is a winning endgame for white. Instead he played knight takes knight. Pawn takes. And now rook to e3. Again, missing rook to b7. Rook takes g7. And white is winning this as well. He played in the game rook to e3, and after rook a b8, the position's completely level here. Okay, we're going to save some time here and jump ahead about 5 moves, 6 moves here, to where we come to this position. And here, white played bishop to c1, which is a horrible mistake. I can understand him not wanting to trade rooks, but it was better to play something like, I don't know, bishop f8. You know, I think that black's a bit better here, but white has some play left in the position. Instead, white played bishop to c1. Okay, let me flip the board here, and we will assume control of the black pieces. Black to move and win. What would you play if you were playing black? Go ahead and pause the video and see what you can come up with, and when you're satisfied with your answer, hit play and we'll see what we get. Okay, in the game, king to e8 was played, and that is not the move. Black had a win here with the move bishop to c4. Okay, he has to remain in contact with the bishop on c1, so he has to play either rook to d1 or e1. Now a4. The problem for white is that that pawn's just going to come marching up the board. So king f2 protects the rook so that if he plays a3, the bishop can take. But he can play rook to b3, hitting the pawn on c3. And now if he plays bishop to d2, we have rook to b2. We're ready to throw that pawn up the board. King to e3, rook to a1, a2, bishop c1, Now rook to b1, and it's all over for white. He has to give up material here. So rook to e3, protecting the c-pawn, and now a3. And there's not much white can do about the pawn coming up other than giving away his bishop. And black is a full piece up. A very easy win here. So, yeah, it's been a roller coaster of a game. And black certainly missed his biggest shot right there. Played king to e8. And now if white were to play bishop to a3, he's back in the game. But he played king to f2. And this runs into trouble. And fortunately, Austin did see this move. He plays bishop c4 now. Rook to e1. Rook to b3. Same idea, but if he'd played it a move before, it would have been easily winning. Well, here, white could have played a couple moves ago bishop to a3 and he'd be okay. But here, after bishop to d2 to protect the pawn, get rook to b2 again, king e3, a4. Rook to a1. Now he plays a2. Bishop to b5, I think, would have been a better waiting move. You know, to start to force white to run out of pawn moves, and then he can start marshalling the a pawn up the board. He played rook to a2 here. Rook to b1 was played, and the players agreed to a draw. I can't believe it. They agreed to a draw. This is a shame because black is totally winning. So a3, the idea is to play rook to b2, and then a2. So if he tries to get active with his rook here, the rook to b2, he can take on g7, but a2, well, now he's got to come back and stop that pawn. Rook to b1, and he can check, check, check. Now the checks are over, and he has to give up material. So, yeah, it's all over. Or he can wait for the pawn to promote and then give up the rook. So after a3, bishop c1 could be tried, but then we got rook to e2 check. Now king to f3, a2, now rook to c2, h4. You know, there's really no method the whites play here, but there is for black. Rook takes c3 check. The bishop is unable to protect the pawn on c3, and if he goes to a3, rook takes c3 is going to pick up the bishop. And the bishop has to stay on the c1, a3 diagonal to keep black from playing rook to b2 to b1, forcing white to give up his rook for the pawn. This means that all white has is king and pawn moves. Black can do whatever he wants. King f4, rook c2 again, king f3, king to d7. Yeah, poor white. He's just stuck with moving his king and pawns. g4, bishop checks, c5, dc5, d4. And this second pass pawn spells doom for white. Yeah, it's all over. He has to give up material at this point. And boom. Finally gets in the long-awaited rook to b2 to b1. Yeah, a shame. It's amazing they agreed to a draw at this position. But then again, you have to take into account the players are, you know, I don't know the players. Maybe they were, I can't remember if they were younger or older. Some people go to the tournament and they're just like the father of a player, or maybe the son or daughter of a player in the championship section. And they just do this to pass the time while their sibling is playing in the other section. So this could have been the situation there where the result didn't really matter to either player. But if you're looking to improve, and I suspect that's the case here, I hope that this video gives you some food for thought on how to do so. White had several chances to win this game, and he let them slip by. And then black at the very end here had a winning position, but didn't bother to try and press it home. I know this is kind of a long video, but I thought it was a very interesting game. I hope you thought so too. I hope that you picked up some bits of information on how to evaluate rather unclear positions, you know, where you're not sure which path exactly to follow. I hope that it helped you with that somewhat. The Chess Triad is a very handy thing to have. Sometimes it comes naturally to you. You don't have to think about it very hard at all. You go, I have the advantage in time. I have the attack. I'm attacking. Sometimes you have to weigh the differences, as we saw in this game, where material, time, and space all have pretty much equal weight. But as we saw in this game, time was the essential factor and had to be acted upon quickly. So I hope that this discussion on the Chess Triad has helped you out somewhat. Well, that's it for this video, and I will be bringing game fragments for the remainder of the games from round 2. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you stay tuned. Vote, leave comments. Thank you for watching, and until next time, good luck.